Warning. The following presentation contains information that might contradict what you have previously heard, or believed to be true, about how the human body works, and contains material that is not suitable for closed-minded individuals. Enjoy!
So thanks for joining us today. We got a little bit of a change in topics here. We're going to talk a little bit about some mental health issues. Ricci's joining us again. Thanks to her for hopping in and joining the conversation. Just so that everybody's aware, we are talking about some mental health issues. We will bringing up some signs and symptoms of various issues. Please note that we are not your primary healthcare professional, and if you think that you have any of the issues that we are bringing up, please raise them with your own primary care physician or primary care provider.
Okay.
Yeah, so when we look at like the attention deficit issues, the need to have that kind of lifestyle intervention becomes very important. And it becomes important because of the fact that we have this kind of neuroanatomical, neurophysiological effect that the neurotransmitters have. And what can happen when we have the lifestyle intervention is it allows us to kind of rebalance that neurotransmitter, and so that the neurophysiological, neuroanatomical function is proper, is normalized. And what ended up happening, so we had the three that are diagnostic attention deficit. But what happens is because of the way in which different manifestations come in, there is a small group of neuropsychologists that basically said, well, it's not just three. There's really kind of these seven. And so like if you go to any of the internet search engines and you type in like types of attention deficit issues.
Yeah.
Or if you go and do the, do I have attention deficit, ADD, ADHD, and do the internet tests, they'll be like, there's these like seven different types. And basically what ends up happening is that these small group basically said, okay, instead of just having those three, there's really these seven. And they basically broke it down into what they call classic, which is inattentive, hyperactive, impulsive. And then you have inattentive, and that's, you have problems with executive functions, organization, planning, priority, time management, self-monitoring stuff. And then you have this over-focused. And this is where you are hyper-focused on one thing and you kind of have difficulty going in between tasks.
Yeah.
And then they have this, what they call their temporal lobe, which is you are emotionally overreactive.
Me my whole life.
And you tend to have issues with moodiness. You can't have issues with memory and retention of information. And then they have this, they say what you have this limbic attention deficit, which is you have problems with self-esteem, problems with constant feelings of guilt. You have, you express excessive and unrealistic threats. You have this, what they call their anxious attention deficit, which is basically you have, you over express symptoms of stress. So you have problems with headaches. You have problems with gastrointestinal functions. You have low self-esteem. You have problems sleeping. And then they have one that they call kind of the ring of fire, which is kind of like this, everything kind of lumps on together, where you have excessive levels of anxiety, you have excessive levels of hyperactivity, you have impulsivity control, you have problems falling asleep, you have problems staying asleep, you're overreactive, you are quick to anger. And if you look at what is just listed out in those seven things, it's basically kind of breaking into, okay, if you look at the temporal lobe, the limbic, the ring of fire, anxious, that's hyperactive, impulsive. If you look at the inattentive, overfocused, that's the predominant inattentive presentation.
I definitely feel like have all of those.
Mm-hmm. And so if you have attention deficit, if you have diagnosed attention deficit issues, you're going to fall into one of their 7 categories because it's kind of like very broad spectrum. And the reason why we tend to have these broad spectrums when it comes to the neurological deficits is because we don't have hard, fast areas that we can say, okay, this is where the problem is. This is where the problem is, because it's the way in which the anatomy and the physiology of the brain functions is very fluid. I like to use this example in terms of what the anatomy of the brain actually is. It's not like what you see in the TV medical shows.
Yeah.
And it's not like the models. It's like a very kind of semi-solid jello.
Yeah, I felt one before.
And it's very, it's excessively soft. It's excessively pliable. There's a joke in a TV show where they were joking about the hardness and the wetness of a brain. And what you want to have is you want to have a very wet brain. And the reason why we want to have a very wet brain is because you want to have these kind of fluid kind of connections forming, reforming, reshaping. And every time we get this new connection, this new reforming, the brain's going to change its shape a little bit.
Right.
And so when we look at like areas of the brain that we see these attention deficit issues come into play, we look at it in terms of areas that are associated with executive functions. And the things that are associated with executive functions are things like emotional control, movement control, memory. All of those factors come into play when it comes into executive functions. Yeah. And executive functions are things that are predominantly going to be frontal cortex associated areas and limbic system areas. And what's happening is that when we have areas that get damaged, those areas that get damaged, we end up having some sort of attention deficit issue come out, which is where when we talk about, okay, what can cause attention deficit issues? One of the things that can cause attention deficit issues is actual brain trauma. Concussions can cause attention deficit issues, along with a whole host of other neuroanatomical, neurophysiological, neurodegenerative issues. There's also exposure to toxins that can cause neuroanatomical issues to arise. Exposure to heavy metals can cause it. Exposure, fetal exposure to distinct chemicals. Once again, this is a non-diagnostic list of stuff. Yeah. And it's a non-etiological list of stuff. Well, I'm not saying this is what's causing issues. This is, we know that there's an association between these factors. The problem is that because we cannot study attention deficit issues in animal models, it's very hard, both ethically as well as empirically, to study root causes for the attention deficit issues to come about. And so we have all these associations, and there really are just associations between factors and having attention deficit issues. And so exposure to heavy metals, exposure to nicotine, exposure to alcohol, exposure to stimulants during fetal development are associated with attention deficit issues. Okay. There is an anecdotal evidence about consumption of sugar and hyperactivity. And this is where, we're recording this mid-September 2023, and Halloween, and the fact that I'm not going to give my children candy at Halloween because I don't want them acting like wild animals. Yeah. Well, no, kids are acting like kids. All we're doing is associating the fact that they had a piece of candy with them acting like a kid. And so the association between sugar content and hyperactivity is not there. There is an association between children that have a diagnosed hyperactivity issue with wanting sugar.
Yes.
But that is more about metabolism than it is about sugar causing issues.
Yes.
There is an association between sugar consumption and gratification, dopamine spiking.
Yes. So we want that like food fixation, the sugar for a reward.
Mm-hmm.
And there's or I've been told that a lot of people with ADHD also have like a binge eating disorder.
Very easy.
Yeah.
Very, very easy. And once again, it goes into same thing with people with OCD.
Mm-hmm.
People with OCD, people with attention deficit issues, people who have dopamine issues,
mm-hmm.
and or serotonin issues,
mm-hmm.
have a increased relative risk for having eating disorders.
Yeah.
Binge eating, anorexia nervosa, reverse anorexia, which is those are kind of body dysmorphic issues. The reverse anorexic issues is more associated with male bodybuilders in terms of their body dysmorphia and the fact that I have to get bigger, bigger, bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where they'll, I guess they call it dirty bulking, I think is the phrase that a lot of them use.
Yeah.
Where they will eat everything and anything they can get their hands on in an attempt to bulk as big as they can bulk. As opposed to what everybody thinks about when they think about anorexia nervosa, which is I'm going to avoid food at all costs.
Yeah.
I'm going to develop an aversion to eating food.
Yeah. And, so I've had both.
And so what ends up happening for binge eaters, for people with anorexia nervosa, bulimics is slightly different in terms of the neuroanatomical, neurophysiological response that comes into that. That's more of a shame, guilt issue as opposed to a reward response issue.
Right.
For the anorexic, for the binge, if I have a dopamine issue, if I have a serotonin issue, I have an increased risk for having eating disorders that are associated with those two neurotransmitters.
Yeah.
And binge and anorexia are both associated with those two neurotransmitters.
Yes.
Now, when we get back to the sugar issue, within that, if I don't associate sugar with a pleasant reward response, I'm not going to have that same response. I'm not going to have that want for sugar. Because when we look at the binging is in a lot of the sugar high, there is a link of sugar consumption, in particular fructose consumption. Yeah. Because of the sweet to spiking of dopamine in the reward centers of the limbic system. The reward centers within our brain. And when I get that pleasant feeling, when I get that reward response taking place, I'm going to want to do it again. And I'm going to want to do it again, and I want to do it again. And if I have that impulsivity issue within my attention deficit, I'm going to have a higher likelihood of having that style of response to distinct foods or avoidance of foods.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
In the past, I was very obsessed with wanting to be skinny. And then, I was very malnourished, so I ended up like binge eating because I'm freaking starving. And that was going on for a while. And then 2 years later, I became obsessed with building muscle and, my body. And just there's a lot that really just goes into this whole like illness, mental illness. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when we look at like the mental issues with the attention deficit side of stuff, one of they claim it as a side effect, but it's not really a side effect. It's an actual effect of the medicine. The dopamine receptor medicines or the dopamine agonist medicines tend to impact hunger response. And that's because it goes back into what is actually regulating when I'm hungry, when I'm full. And two of the neurotransmitters that are there are dopamine and serotonin. And dopamine is triggering you need to eat response. But if I'm giving dopamine in terms of rebalancing everything, or if I'm interfering with dopamine in terms of rebalancing everything, one of the effects that comes out of that is I forget to eat.
Me.
Because I don't get that, because I don't have that the neurotransmitter signals correctly acting at the correct time for me to eat. Yeah.
I even I leave and I'm like, oh my God, I forgot to eat. I didn't even bring my food. Like, how could I forget it?
And it goes into that the whole lifestyle interventions is having a plan, is making a plan or making a checklist. With everything. Did you eat today? Did you eat breakfast? And it goes into doing a planner for the day. Yeah. And one of the things that colleague of mine gave to me, and I kind of have adopted it, is for all students is, okay, here's 24 hours in a day broken down into 20-minute segments. Oh. When are you going to sleep? When are you going to eat? Yes. When are you going to go to the gym? When you have class A? I know when your class with me is. So that's already on the schedule. Yeah. But where's everything else going to fit in? So that you have that schedule put together. Yes. So that you become organized.
Yes. And very structured. I've became I'm eating at 12. That's the time I eat. I'm going to the gym right after I eat. I'm going to eat dinner at this time. And I already know, my body knows, I go to sleep at the same time every night, wake up usually around the same time. And then when schedule changes happen, it's hard to adapt. Not necessarily hard. It's stressful to a certain extent. But then I'm easily able to okay, class this time, I go home, I go straight to the gym. And then I need to eat, do all the things. So having a structured life and people say it's Ricci, you're running like a clock, you're just clockwork. And I'm like, well, it helps me. Because
we talked about your punctuality. And it's something that goes into that time management and the preparedness and the lateness and stuff like that. It's just well, if you didn't have the scheduled routine, the punctuality would fall away. And lateness and tardiness would start to kind of creep up. Right. And so what ends up happening is, and so I do the same thing. It's I have a schedule. It's 5 o'clock of here, 6 o'clock I'm here, 7 o'clock I'm here, 8 o'clock I'm doing this, 9 o'clock I'm doing this, 10 o'clock I'm doing this, and it doesn't vary. And it's just it becomes routine. Yes. And it can become so routine that you forget what day of the week it is. Unless there's some variance in each day of the week.
There's also times I'm very there's no leniency. People have a hard time with that. I'm no, I have to go to sleep. I can't be out. Yep. This is my routine. Yep. No, I can't eat later than 12, That's one of hard to balance.
It's the movie Gremlins, where you can't feed them after midnight. You can't get them wet. You can't do this. You can't do that. Otherwise, bad things happen. And so when you start setting up, and once again it goes into the lifestyle interventions, because the drugs are going to stop working at some point in time. And it's not just for attention deficit issues. For almost all neurophysiological, neuroanatomical deficits, OCD, bipolar, attention deficit hyperactivity disorders, the meds will stop working after a while. Yep. And unless you happen to have started behavioral modifications you're not going to be able to compensate correctly. And so one of the things that has recently come out in terms of treatments and in treatment interventions, particularly within the young, early diagnosed attention deficits, is lifestyle behavior modification before medicine.
Oh, yes.
Where you're taught compensations, you're taught accommodations. You learn not necessarily how to live with the attention deficit issues, but to use the attention deficit issues to your benefit. And if I can use the attention deficit issues to my benefit, then I can slowly start to, and once again, I don't like using this word, but grow out of the issues. And this goes into the neuroanatomical differences between the attention deficit hyperactive brain of the adult versus the child that grew out of it. And it has to deal with how many layers of cortical cells there happen to be. And so during the early development, during early learning phases, school age, if I'm still growing neurons and pruning neurons and getting the correct layering of the cortex, because the way in which the brain functions anatomically is it functions kind of like a book, where you basically have these pages, and each page is a layer of cells. And then those layers of cells are then connected to other layers of cells. And so that whole mass that we have in our brain is basically broken up into like 7 or 8 layers of cells. And then a whole bunch of connections, and then 7, 8 layers of cells, and then a whole bunch of connections, and then 7, 8 layers of cells. And then every once in a while, we get these kind of clusters of cells, what we call nuclei or ganglions. And so when it happens in those nuclei and ganglions, instead of being layered, they're clustered. They're kind of a clump of cells as opposed to layers of cells. And so what's happening is that if I can teach myself behavioral modifications as opposed to medicines, and I'm someone that can grow out of the attention deficit issues, then I never have to worry about having the neurotransmitter imbalance come up to play. Whether it's producing enough, having enough receptors, having upregulation of receptors or downregulation of receptors, having more receptors available or less receptors available, is never going to be a factor. But if I immediately start treating this with medicine, I never learn the compensation mechanisms.
Right.
I never learn the organization. I never learn, okay, I have attention deficit issues. That doesn't mean I work in a quiet environment, because a quiet environment can be just as bad as a too noisy environment.
Yeah.
Because if it's painful for me to work in a quiet environment.
Oh.
Because all of a sudden I'll be trying to focus on something and then a thought will come in.
I see.
And I can no longer attend to what I need to attend to because that thought.
The rumination. Yeah.
And all of a sudden I'm now thinking about that thought, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, how can I solve that problem that I've been thinking about? Whereas if I have white noise in the background, if I have music playing, it allows me to focus on what I need to focus on and minimizes the distractions of the internal thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah.
But once again, I don't want to have it to being too boisterous of an environment. Like I cannot work in a room where it's like 500 people all working at the same time.
Oh yeah, me too.
And I can't take tests in rooms with hundreds of students taking tests. Because either I'm going to rush through the test to be the first one out of there so I don't think about why am I not the first one being done, or every time someone goes to turn in a test, I'm going to get distracted by how that person get done so quickly.
Yeah.
What do they study that I didn't study?
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
And so when you're people who have attention deficit issues, working in too quiet an environment can be just as bad as working in too loud of an environment. Where people think, oh, you have attention deficit issues, so I'm going to make sure that the room is completely sterile. not realizing that this having a sterile room is just as bad as having a too distracted room.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I like everything quiet. Like even when driving, I'm like, no, I don't want to have music. It's too overstimulating. Yeah, it's hard. I mean,
and that goes into the different types of attention deficit issues that are there. And so if you have impulse issues, if you have impulsivity, hyperactive impulsivity, you don't want to have too much stimulus because you're trying to regulate your impulses. Whereas if you have inattentive issues, you want to have secondary stimulus there that doesn't distract you, but doesn't allow for internal distractions to come into play.
Oh.
So like I can control my impulses, but I have attention deficit issues.
Oh. Yeah.
I'm not going to have hyper swings of stuff. However, I do get anxious about things. And it's stuff where, for me to be a little personal here, for me, I had to learn how to do this behaviorally because of the fact that it was, once again, goes into the generational stuff.
Right.
There was a stigma.
Yes.
Behind attention deficit, and if you weren't the student who was bouncing off a wall, it was very unlikely that you would get diagnosed with attention deficit issues. Because the association is that you had to be hyperkinematic in order to be hyperactive.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, it's like I couldn't, like, people would actively take the TV remote away from me growing up because I would constantly just change the channel.
Oh, for me, I would watch the same thing over and over.
Yeah, but like unless the show piqued my interest. And forget about like commercials. No, like that was too much.
Yeah.
And so like I could never have the remote because even if like it was like mid scene of a TV show, the channel would be changed. And like watching sports on TV, like I don't, like I'll have sports on all the time here, but it's always in the background. Like I'm always doing something else. Where growing up, like I would watch the game would be on, and like I'd be like playing out the sport as opposed to watching the sport. Because there would be stuff that I would have to attend that I could not keep my attention to. Right. Unless, once again, it was super high, fast, constant action going on.
Yes. So for me, if I'm like watching a movie, I can't. I have to do something with my hands. I gotta crochet, or like draw anything. I feel like ADHD has been in every nook and cranny of my life. Not just with like the main symptoms, but even the little ones that come with it. It's hard, you know. Thankfully, I grew up with my parents like teaching me organization skills and cleanliness and neatness. Otherwise, I wouldn't be like that today. And I've run on a structure my whole life. Like, you're going to go to sleep at this time, and we got to leave the house at this time. And I'm still like that.
Yep.
It's helped, definitely. And I'm also like, I went to therapy for a while before getting introduced to meds. And meds have helped, yes, but it definitely wasn't the cure.
Yeah, it's not. So the meds are not a cure-all for this. And once again, it goes back into the lifestyle interventions and the need to have that change and that structure. And the thing with most of the neurological deficits that come into play, some people like to call them illnesses. It's not really an illness. It's actually like the term that came out from the ASD branch of neurophysiological research, the neurotypical versus the neuroatypical.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And so the neuroatypical person is someone who has like neurological, what we used to refer to as neurological deficits. The attention deficit, OCD, bipolar, autism, or autistic spectrum disorder, all of that neuroatypical stuff. Once again, because of the way in which the cerebral cortex, the way in which the brain functions.
Yes.
Everything that we do in our life is linked to the areas within, particularly within the brain, that's related to attention deficit issues. And so we're going to see it kind of manifest. So we talked about the fact that you have to exhibit at least 6 distinct cognitive, at least 6 distinct behavioral for six consecutive months in order to have a diagnosis.
Yeah.
And you could consume stuff. You can have environmental stimulus that may make you appear to be attention deficit issues for a week or two, but then it goes away. Or you may be under a whole bunch of stress from work or from school or from life, and you may exhibit some of the stress response attention deficit issues, but then it once again goes away. That's not attention deficit hyperactivity issues. The attention deficit hyperactivity issue, you have to have these things all the time.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be the same things for every person. Which is why if someone says, "Oh, I have ADD," but they don't have it, what they're doing is as you said earlier, you're kind of dismissing it.
Yeah.
They're dismissing it as if it's like not a real thing.
Exactly.
Or, and I've had this with some of the people that I've worked with in my educational career, where they get overwhelmed and they forget stuff and they go, "Oh, I have attention deficit issues. I must have adult onset attention deficit issues." And it's just like, well, if you're a little bit more organized, you probably wouldn't have these issues. And these are people who like if you look at like my desktop screen, it's like everything is in this distinct folder, and the folders are titled, and the files are titled. And if I have to do revamps on files, it's like version 1, version 2, version 3, version 4, version 5. But people who say, "Oh, I'm have attention deficit issues," if you look at their desktop, it's like nothing but files. And it's just like, no wonder you can't find anything. Or you go to there's the old saying that you rather have a messy desk than an empty desk. But if you go to the attention deficit person and you show them the messy desk, it's going to put them off. It's going to trigger them.
Yes. And
so like for myself, it's like I'm not the neatest person. But if I start seeing a mess, I'm gonna clean it up.
Oh my God, me too. I'll like clean just because I'm like so irritated by it. Even though it's not mine, I'm like, I can't have it here.
But at the same time, I may forget to clean up some stuff.
Me too.
And like it may be like 2 or 3 weeks and then all of a sudden it's like I'll see this mess, and it's just like, okay, everything's gonna stop until this mess gets cleaned.
Yeah.
And like I'll have like a pile of stuff, and then all of a sudden it's just like, and a pile and a pile and a pile, and then I'll walk into my office and there's this pile, and it's like, okay, I can't find it.
Yeah.
It's got to go. I got to clean this up. I got to get rid of it. And so when people belittle the attention deficit issues, when people belittle the OCD issues, when people belittle the bipolar issues, when people belittle the autism spectrum issues, it tends to come from the fact that until recently it was not so societally acceptable to have these issues and to be open with these issues. We've become more aware and more open to mental health over the last few years. Yeah. And it's to the betterment of all of us. But at the same time, people see, particularly within the educational world, they see it as, oh, you get this benefit from having attention deficit issues. And it's like, no, I don't get a benefit from it. Do you understand how hard it is for me to have to do what I do with the attention deficit issues?
Yes.
I
Day
have
to
to
day,
I have to spend so much mental energy
yeah.
just walking out of the hallway, remembering what I'm supposed to be doing when I get to the end of the hallway, that I don't want to deal with people while I'm walking in the hallway because I'll forget what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah. It's just it's hard, and
it becomes hard, it becomes difficult, and it becomes problematic with people who don't understand or appreciate
exactly.
the issues that are there.
Yeah.
And when you have people who belittle the condition because they actively choose to do distinct behaviors that would mimic an attention deficit problem, or because of the way in which we function within the society, have such short attention spans that we are unable to have honest conversations about attention deficit hyperactivity disorders.
Exactly. So the world just disregarding it and belittling it and to be a fad and trend, they just add to like the genuine pain and hardships of what we actually go through. And no one else will understand other than a person who also has it.
Or a person who is sympathetic or empathetic to the plight.
Yeah.
And that's where, once again, it goes into the openness that people have, and the fact that you can be an ally without being that within that group. And it goes into conversations that we've had, and then I'm hoping to have a deeper conversation with regarding some of the sexuality, gender issues. That because people don't understand, people belittle.
Yeah.
And it goes in. So we talked about like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder stuff. But there's other things out there.
Yeah.
There's other cognitive issues out there. There's other neuroatypical behaviors out there that people belittle, people denigrate.
Right. And you mentioned that people would tell you, oh, you get benefit from it. Like, meaning some people just use it as an excuse for their actions. And, that's not okay. They're not typically, or when people tell you that there is benefit from that, it's really like, no, I really have this, and I'm having a hard time. I'm not trying to use it as an excuse, but other people would use it as an excuse.
Exactly.
There's a fine line between that.
Yep. Well, thanks for sharing with us, and hopefully everybody got something out of this today.
Thank you for having me.
Yep. Thanks for listening. Hopefully you got some insight into attention deficit and hyperactivity disorders and some of the causes that might bring it about, as well as some of the issues related to the social stigmas or social acceptances that take place around neuro and neurological issues. If you like what we're putting out, please make sure that you go ahead and subscribe to the publications that we're doing. Please make sure you like if you also enjoy what we're putting out there. It helps us out with all the algorithms